Hello! Welcome to the 4th episode of the George Macy Imagery video series. And today we're going to start our journey into the first series of the Limited Editions Club way back in 1929-1930. Although none of these are actually from 1929. These are all Volume 6, Volume 9, and Volume 12, respectively. So these were all in 1930. So at the end of the last video, I said I was going to do 6 of these, but when I was editing the Anatole France video, which had many books, it kind of turned into an hour, and I don't really want all of these videos to be that long. So I've decided I'm only going to do 3 this time. I wanted to do 3 that I actually haven't covered on the blog yet. So that's the selection process. So I'll just go ahead and give a really quick overview of each book, and then I'll get into a little bit more detail once I actually get into each volume one by one. So on your left is Two Medieval Tales by Robert Louis Stevenson, which was illustrated by C.B. Falls, who also served as the designer. In the middle, we've got Tartarin of Tarascon by Alphonse Daudet, which was designed and illustrated by W.A. Dwiggins. And then on our right, we have the Fables of Jean de La Fontaine, which was designed by D.B. Updike and illustrated by Rudolf Rusica. So let's go ahead and we'll go in chronological order. So we'll go with Two Medieval Tales first. Alright, so book number 6 out of the 600 plus that are in the LEC is Two Medieval Tales. So this book has the unfortunate distinction, in my view, of being probably the least well received of the initial series. Macy himself did not care for it, and I'll go ahead and read from the quarto his thoughts. Although I have over the years often been face to face with them, I have always quaked in my shoes when I have had to come face to face with Bruce Rogers or D.B. Updike or W.A. Dwiggins or T.M. Cleland, for these men were gods to worship when I was in school, and I cannot believe yet that I am in position to talk business with them man-to-man fashion or even to criticize the things they do. It is out of this generalization that I find the only excuse for the publication of this book. I think it is a rank failure. I think Mr. Falls knew what he wanted to do, but did not know how to translate his intentions into readable typography. I was afraid of Mr. Falls and afraid of Mr. Marchbanks, and the members of the club had to pay $10 each for a very poor book because of my craven fear. However, I learned from Mr. Falls a truth which has been of great importance to me. This is that the kind of businessmen who set themselves up as printers of fine books are often deliberately unreliable, whereas the kind of artist who illustrates fine books strives to be punctilious. Let's just say punctual, because I get tongue-tied on this word every time. The quarto has it with a hyphen, and personally, I have a really hard time when hyphens on really long, tricky words I've never pronounced before show up. So punctual, reliable, devoid of temperament in the conduct of business affairs. Mr. Falls promised to deliver his pictures on April 1st, and he delivered them on April 1st. In the ensuing 10 years, I have known few artists to break their contracts. I have known few printers to live up to them. Alright, so this is from the library of Linden Holt Langdon. I have a couple from this, if I remember correctly. So, Two Medieval Tales by Robert Louis Stevenson, introduced by Clayton Hamilton, and the illustrations by C.B. Falls. And this was the 6th LEC. It was printed by the Marchbanks Press in New York, set in lithotype Jensen on worthy Aurelian paper, bound by George McKibben & Son in New York, in full natural cowhide stamped blind and gold, 86 pages at 7 1/8 by 9 inches. So, I have heard a few devotees as well not take kindly to this book, primarily because of the type, and I can see why. But let's go ahead and just do a little bit more overview before we get into that. So the two stories within are A Lodging for the Night and The Sire de Maltroit's Door. And this was the first Stevenson, but certainly not the last. Stevenson was printed a lot by the George Macy Company, and pretty much all the major hits are there: Treasure Island, Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But a few of his more curious items, like Travels with a Donkey and The Master of Ballantrae, were also printed. So if you like Stevenson, you can collect really nice editions of Stevenson through the Limited Editions Club. And there's 8 illustrations by Falls, and here is the text. Now, the font itself, I don't have too many issues with, and I happen to like the medieval initials throughout the text. But the issue, I think, really with this book is that, and again, I really do like the initials, especially on the stories, is that there's no spacing between paragraphs when the next initial comes. And so it just seems really smushed. And it's unfortunate. As you can see, it just kind of continues. So here's an example of one of Falls' illustrations. I like these illustrations quite a bit. If my memory serves me correctly, Falls was an advertising illustrator, a very popular one during the 1920s. And I could see that in how this looks. But I still think it has a classical approach. But it's definitely got that 1920s, early 30s vibe in terms of how the stool is here and how just some of the proportions are. But I like the illustrations quite a bit. I think they're very nice. And then here's another example of an illustration. So I disagree that this is one of the worst LECs. I actually quite like it. I'm happy to have it in my collection. So this is copy number 278 of 1,500 copies, and is signed by Falls. That is the spine with the gold. Alright, so next up on the docket is Tartarin of Tarascon, and you can see that it's 2 volumes, but in contrast, this is very tiny. This is a very tiny book, which I think is very cute. The problem is that it's going to make seeing the illustrations really hard. So, and this does come with the announcement card. There we go. So this was sent out about June 30th, it says, in 1930. So let's just hit on these delightful little tidbits of production notes. This was written by Alphonse Daudet, translated with an introduction by Jacques Leclerc, designed and illustrated with line drawings by W.A. Dwiggins, printed by Richard W. Ellis at the Georgian Press in Westport, Connecticut, set in monotype Baskerville on Praga, handmade paper from Czechoslovakia, bound by George McKibben & Son, New York, in half black cloth, gold stamped, printed paper sides designed by Mr. Dwiggins in 2 volumes, 310 pages, 4 3/8 by 6 inches. Now, in contrast to 2 Medieval Tales, Macy quite liked this book. He said, "If I were asked to select the 10 finest books we have published, I would probably insist on selecting 50 and calling them the 10 finest. Since this little book would certainly be among them, I have often wondered over its lack of popularity. The Dwiggins idea to print a series of artist's notes at the end of each chapter of text seems to me fresh and delighting. It is characteristic of Mr. Dwiggins that he should apply a fresh idea to each book he does. It is characteristic that some of the books should fail to realize his intention, but this is one which should have been considered by all to have realized his intention. Alright. So I'm going to hold this closer to the camera because it is so small it's going to be hard to see anything. So I apologize for any focusing things, but as you can see, it's got a nice little lion head decoration there. And let's go ahead and move into the text proper. So this is a nice readable font that's of a good size, especially when you consider the book that it's in, because the book that it's in is very small. But what Dwiggins did is that at the end of each section of text is where all of the illustrations are, and there are little notes of what's going on in the story. And it is a cute idea. I actually quite like it. Dwiggins did not do a ton of illustrations like this either for the Limited Editions Club and later books that he designed. He really just kind of switched into the design mode, which is totally fine. I don't know how many of these there are, but there is at least this one. And for the colophon, so this is number 1249 of 1500 and is signed by Dwiggins. Richard Ellis would go on to design books of his own in a few years' time, beginning with The Wonderful Adventures of Paul Bunyan. Our last volume today is Fables of La Fontaine. Now you'll notice that there's two translators here, which is unusual, but there's a reason why that is. And I will let Macy tell that tale here in a moment. These illustrations are also on the small side, so I'll be bringing the books closer once we get through the production details and Macy's comments. So this is book number 12. So the last one of series 1. It was translated and with introductions by Joseph Auslander and Jacques Leclerc. So Leclerc has already got 2 books to his name, and he's got several more down the road. Illustrated with copper engravings by Rudolf Ruzicka. Pulled by A.W. Elson from Belmont, Massachusetts. Designed and printed by D.B. Updike at the Merrymount Press in Boston. Handset and Jansen type on Hurlbut special paper. Bound by Boston Book Binding Company in Boston, in full blue cloth in 2 volumes, 706 pages, 5.5 by 8.5 inches. Macy liked this book a fair amount as well. What he says here is, among the hundreds of books which Mr. Updike had printed in his long career, I think this can be called the most typical Updike job, and therefore one of the most satisfying. What surprises me whenever I look at this book is that Mr. Ruzicka's copper engravings are cold and formal, Mr. Updike's typography is cold and formal, and they combine into the presentation of a remarkably fine edition of a series of verses which are neither cold nor formal. The publication of this book brought home to me the perils lying in our announcement of a month-by-month schedule of issue. This had to become the 12th and final publication of the first series. What woes were mine when I found that Auslander was doing the translations at a snail's pace, and how happy I was when Jacques Leclerc saved the day by translating the second half for me at great speed. So that's the reason why we have 2 volumes with 2 different translators, is that Auslander was taking his time and was taking too long, and Leclerc was called in to finish the job. And it did, I would say, about a quarter more based on the page size difference in the books. in a very, very brief period. So let's go ahead and look at the Auslander volume, volume 1. I do have a letter for this one, which is very exciting. I have 2 from the same collector in series 1, and I believe the Decameron is the other one, and I believe that it also has the letter. So good on this particular collector for holding on to those. Okay, so here is the pre-title page. This is the biggest illustration in the book, and it's also shared with volume 2. The other ones that are in here are smaller, and they divide the books. So let's go ahead and look at the title page. Rustica's work in here is very nice. I do prefer wood illustrations, but these copper ones are quite nice indeed. Alright, so here is another example. And then we give an example of what the font looks like. So here is Fable 1, the Grasshopper and the Ant. Pretty iconic one. I remember reading this one. And I'll give you a couple more examples of Rustica's work. There's this one here. The stag beetle and a nest with an eagle, it looks like. And then the next one is here, which is a fox looking at what appears to be a goat in a well. And then the colophon is in the second volume. So this is copy 1098 of 1500 and is signed by Rustica there. Alright, so let me just go into a little bit more on at least some illustrator background in all of these. So Falls did not return. That was the only commission for Falls, which given Macy's experience is not surprising to learn. Dwiggins did illustrate a few other things, but primarily his focus would switch to more design work. He did do decorations for Drawl stories. He was involved with one of the Shakespeare volumes. Let me see which one. He did line drawings for The Taming of the Shrew in the Shakespeare series. He did some decorations for the lives of the noble Grecians and Romans, as well as the special one of Towards the Reform of the Paper Currency. Which I have actually never seen that one. This was Rudolf Rustica's only LEC. But I love all 3 of these books very, very much. The first series is proving to be one of my favorites, just on the factor of how cool it is to see these books in this state. These books I've been collecting for so long and actually starting to have like the genesis of the enterprise. It's really, really cool. I love having 6 of these, and my goal for 2021 is to get the other 6. That's probably not going to happen for a little while. I kind of hoped that I was going to get a tax return, but it looks like I'm paying this year, which, yay, how fun for me. So next month, what we will do is we'll cover 3 more of the first series, but those ones have been posted on the blog. So that's Leaves of Grass, Snowbound, and the Decameron. And then later on in the year, we'll get into the other 6. But I hope you enjoyed looking at 3 of the volumes of the first series. I'm really stoked to have them in this condition. Like, they're getting close to 100 years old at this point. And to have books 100 years old in this condition is just remarkable to me. So thank you so much for watching. I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll see you next month.